Banneker's Peace Department. Officially, Black History Month has passed, and it seems that the shortest month cannot hold the wealth of information garnered over the last 5 centuries of black life in this new world. By the way, it certainly wasn't new to native peoples who dwelled here an estimated 50,000 years before European invasion. If the name Benjamin Banneker, 1731-1806, still has resonance, it's probably because, for generations, blacks and others have recalled his exploits of scientific brilliance and acclaim as a kind of historical antidote to the white supremacy that has prevailed since the establishment of this settler state. His self-taught abilities in astronomy, mathematics, and architecture are generally known, as was his early life accomplishment of constructing from wood a working clock that kept seconds, minutes, and hours have echoed down centuries. But in relatively recent days, while reading the Black Chronicle, I came across a quite remarkable article recounting views expressed in his 1795 almanac. Yes, he wrote an almanac. What surprised me was this particular article didn't deal with science per se, well, maybe political science. It dealt with peace. In a 7-point program, Banneker called for the U.S. government to establish a Secretary of Peace. Banneker reasoned, as the War Office of the United States was established in time of peace during the Convention of 1787, it is equally reasonable that a peace office should be established in time of war. His proposal, wide-ranging in moral and nationalistic points of view, called for far more than the establishment of a government department or office. He called for the establishment of public schools all throughout the new country, that every family be furnished with a Bible, and that the death penalty be repealed. He also sought the abolition of weapons, gaudy military uniforms, and titles of such rank. Here was a free black man, scientist, and writer, writing about the issues of his day and seeking to create social change. When next you hear the name of Benjamin Banneker, think not of architecture, of astronomy, nor even of wooden clocks. Think of peace. From Imprisoned Nation, this is Mumia, Abu-Jamal. These commentaries are recorded by Noelle Hanrahan of Prison Radio. Frederick Douglass, The Freedom of Some or the Freedom of All. As the presidential campaigns of Senators Hillary Rodham Clinton and Barack Obama continue in their breakneck pace to acquire the most delegates and thus the nomination, various segments of the population have endeavored to pose the questions of whether gender should trump race in this rare historical moment. Some have suggested that Senator Clinton, as a woman, deserves the nomination given the nation's delay in granting women's suffrage until 1920. Some have argued that because black men could vote since the ratification of the 15th Amendment to the Constitution in 1870. Of course, this is a cribbed reading of American history. For passage of a constitutional amendment was one thing. The actual implementation of such a right would be almost a century for half the country. It took long and tortuous struggle for the alleged constitutional right to vote to be made real. For if the Constitution were sufficient, why would there be a need for a Voting Rights Act passed in 1965? One great black leader, Frederick Douglass, was an outspoken defender of women's rights and never stopped being so during his long public career, both before and after the Civil War. Indeed, the love of freedom being so close to his heart, when he escaped to England to raise the money to legally purchase his freedom, he used his time there to criticize the conditions of white, poor working classes in England, Scotland, and Ireland. He would write in The Liberator, "Though I am more closely connected and identified with one class of outraged, oppressed, and enslaved people, I cannot allow myself to be insensible to the wrongs and sufferings of any part of the great family of man. I am not only an American slave, but a man, and as such am bound to use my powers for the welfare of the whole human brotherhood. I believe that the sooner the wrongs of the whole human family are made known, the sooner those wrongs will be reached." When the princely sum of $750 was raised by British friends and supporters, Douglass bought his own freedom. and indeed had the bill of sale to his own self placed in his hands. When he returned to the U.S., he wrote in his own paper, the North Star, and announced from public women's conventions that right is of no sex. When women's rights activist Elizabeth Cady Stanton introduced the resolution for women's suffrage in 1848, Douglass was the only man, black or white, to step forward and support her motion and argue that political equality was necessary for the complete liberation of women. In the North Star of a week after the convention, Douglass reiterated his support, writing, "Standing as we do upon the watchtower of human freedom, we cannot be deterred from an expression of our approbation of any movement, however humble, to improve and elevate the character of any members of the human family. We are free to say that in respect to political rights, we hold women to be justly entitled to all that we claim for man. Our doctrine is that right is of no sex. We therefore bid the women engaged in this movement our humble Godspeed." There were few black leaders, whether they call themselves radicals, liberals, or even conservatives, who do not turn for inspiration to the words and wisdom of Frederick Douglass. As an activist, as an agitator, as a premier journalist, as a powerful spokesman, he had few true peers. Without a doubt, he was a leader and not a follower. That he informs our steps now, over a century after his passing, is a testament to the clarity of his vision and the power of his spirit. He didn't serve the interests of power. He critiqued it. He assailed it. He used his gifts to push it closer, ever closer, to a more human expression. We all live in a world that still bears his imprint. From death row, this is Mumia, Abu-Jamal. These commentaries are produced by Noelle Hanrahan for Prison Radio. Paul the Magnificent. It's amazing that we're marking the 110th anniversary of the birth of Paul Robeson, born April 9th, 1898. For many years in my youth, I regarded him as my hero and one of the greatest men who's ever lived. Notice I said greatest men, not greatest black men. That's because of his extraordinary life, his wealth of talents and abilities, his soaring intellect, but above all, his magnificent heart, which beat for all the oppressed of the world. It was maybe in 1973 when I read the book Here I Stand, his explosive autobiography, which hit me like a ton of bricks. Above all of his extraordinary life, what struck me the most was his reply to a congressman who threatened to hold him in contempt because of his refusal to admit his membership in the Communist Party. Robeson testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee on June 12, 1956. When I read his words, nearly 20 years later, a chill went through me like a bolt of lightning. He told the committee, "My father was a slave, and my people died to build this country, and I'm going to stay here and have a part of it, just like you. And no fascist-minded people will drive me from it. If this were the movies, it would have required a clap of thunder to mark this dramatic moment." As an artist, acting and singing on stages the world over, Robeson's genius could hardly be denied. But as ever, there was something greater than his immense talent. Again, I think it was his heart, from which poured a deep feeling of commitment to those who didn't have his life options. It is especially meaningful when we consider that when he spoke these words, he was surely among one of the wealthiest black men in America in 1941. It means so little when a man like me wins some success. Where's the benefit when a small class of Negroes makes money and can live well? It may be encouraging, but it has no deeper significance. I feel this way because I have cousins who can neither read nor write. I have had a chance. They have not. That is the difference. What would a man such as this think of the bling-bling that has become the core of black fashion? What would he think of such conspicuous consumption when so many are doing so poorly in this, the richest nation on earth? Paul was far more than an accomplished scholar, a lawyer, an actor, singer, and orator. He was a human being of the first order who who rightly deserved the sobriquet, the tallest tree in our forest. His words have a relevance that continues to inspire us decades after his utterance. Of his art, he described it thus: "It is a weapon in the struggle for my people's freedom and for the freedom of all people." The Bay Area Paul Robeson Centennial Committee is to be commended for remembering this great black world leader. How much such art as he produced is needed now. From death row, this is Mumia, Abu-Jamal.
Marcus Garvey, 1887-1940. Unless one is Jamaican or raised in a household suffused with black consciousness, it's unlikely that the name Marcus Garvey is familiar to you. There was a time during the first quarter of the 20th century when he was among the most famous men in the world. Raised in Jamaica, Garvey was a fiery orator, a gifted writer, and a master organizer. Although he left this life a generation before the 1960s, no black leader before or since has ever amassed more numbers in its grassroots organization. Garvey, upon coming to the U.S., built the Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, its affiliate, the African Communities League, and opened chapters in every major black population center in the nation. Headquartered in Harlem, New York, Garvey's paper, Negro World, brought black news to readers in English, Spanish, and French. His organizations grew rapidly and touched the lives of millions. Perhaps it shouldn't surprise us that disaffected members would conspire with government agencies to disrupt the UNIA, jail him, and later deport him. For black nationalists, their efforts are ever measured against the enormous success of Garvey, against which they are often found wanting. His voice and his presence gave hope and purpose to a community choking on the poisons of white supremacy and racist violence. Among such a constituency, the name and life of Marcus Garvey should be and will be long remembered. From Imprisoned Nation, this is Mumia, Abu-Jamal.
These commentaries are recorded by Noelle Hanrahan of Prison Radio.